I am Eileen Cook, and I'm excited to be here on the Strategic Authorpreneur podcast. And today we're talking about being a full-time author. Hey there, Strategic Authorpreneurs. I'm Crystal Hunt.
And I'm Michela Mitrani. We're here to help you save time, money, and energy as you level up your writing career.
Welcome to episode 40 of the Strategic Authorpreneur podcast. On today's show, we're talking with special guest Eileen Cook about her experience of transitioning to being a full-time author and the book that she and I have written on some strategies and exercises you can work through to help you tackle that, the going full-time as an author thing, more successfully. First, just a note, if you find these episodes helpful, you can assist us in keeping them ad-free by going to our website at strategicauthorpreneur.com and clicking the Buy Us a Coffee button. While neither of us drink coffee, we will use that money on extravagances like website hosting, podcast distribution, and transcriptions of our episodes. First, let's have a little bit of an update as to what we have been doing this past week. Michele, what have you been up to?
Crystal, I'm all over the place. I am in the middle of publishing, actually one of the books is already published, and now I'm about to publish another book, which is Soul of Stone. I spoke about that in the past few weeks. Soul of Stone is out, my mythological fantasy in the English world, and now I'm gearing up for releasing it in the Italian front. So there is so many things to do that I'm not going to bother by just mentioning all of them, but it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot to take in. I mentioned this a few weeks ago. Now the workload is getting bigger and bigger, which is exciting because you are seeing all the pieces you worked for in the past few months actually coming together. But at the same time, you have to be very careful not to burn yourself out in many ways. So it's something also that we discussed before. So it's interesting and it's lovely. And if you are interested in mythological fantasy, I definitely suggest you to give my book a try. I'm not very good at self-promoting, as you can see, but here you have it. Soul of Stone is out, and I'm very proud to announce that. And really, all the other things that I've been working on, especially in this past few weeks, that I can see how it is difficult to fast release the multiple titles. Now it's going to be Soul of Stone and the Italian version, and then I'm going to release in 2, maximum 3 weeks from now, another book, which is the second one in the collection/series of mythological fantasy. It's not easy, and it's taking a lot of hours away from my writing, which is good. It's fine in this process, in this moment, I'm learning, but I do understand when there are people talking about writing burnout. So that's something that I want to definitely avoid. And it's a subject of conversation that we discussed before, even in our leveling up section. So I want to try to avoid that mistakes. But it's good, again, that I'm trying and seeing how all the pieces fits together and what amount of time and resource involves. So it's super, super, hyper interesting to see and super helpful for me. So I'm going to survive this. You're going to see me surviving on November and December. And at the same time, in order to survive even better, I'm reading a book that I'm actually loving. And this is part dark fantasy, part contemporary fantasy / urban fantasy. I wanted the book that was kind of similar to my Lord of Time. I felt like I wanted something a bit, let's say, magic and dark at the same time. So I'm reading now a book by Brian Camp, which is called, if you are on YouTube, you can see it. Let's see if I can show it a bit better. City of Lost Fortune, which was a book that was suggested to me by author friend, and I'm really liking it. I definitely suggest you to read that if you like fantasy, contemporary fantasy, urban fantasy, and it's really similar. It has its own personality, but it's very similar to American Gods by Neil Gaiman. So definitely, if you like that, I suggest you to give it a try. Now I know also Crystal has some things that she wants to say, something to catch up, something to make you aware. Crystal, take it from here.
All right. Well, I'm still writing Elfed, and I'm having lots of fun with various Christmas romancy shenanigans. And I have my author assistant working this week on entering all of the details from events, people, places into the plotter database that we've created. I was getting a little overwhelmed by managing my own side of like the creator side of things, where I have all of these characters and all these books plotted out and all of this stuff, and then managing the part that's already been published. So when I would go and try to decide, oh, can I change this character's role, or can I adjust where this event fits in the timeline, I didn't know if I had publicly committed to that in any of the other like 10 stories that are out there. And so I was having trouble keeping track of what was public facing and what was just created in my head. So I've got my assistant entering all of the things into the database that are public. So whatever she can see from the books, then she's putting that into the plotter database. So I will have my templates and my spreadsheets to guide me, but also I will be able to double check what has been kind of locked down and can't be changed anymore in that side. So I'm very excited to have that as I go into these next couple of books. And I have also been working my way through what is an entire book of notes that I took from the SIWC, the Surrey International Writers Conference workshops this year. Because we did everything at home, there was the recordings of all the sessions are available for 30 days after the conference. And so I was trying to plow through all of those in the period that was available, and then taking all my notes now that that's kind of come to an end. I'm taking all of my notes and just going through them and deciding, okay, of all the plotting things I watched, which pieces am I going to integrate into my templates and my plotting process, and really revising my systems in advance of the new year just to be ready to tackle all of the things that we've decided would be fun. And one of the books that came out of those sessions, multiple people recommended this same book, and it's called Several Short Sentences About Writing. And the person who wrote it is Verlin Klinkenborg. And I had never heard of this book before. And then 3 separate people this year at the conference recommended it. So I ordered it, and I'm going to read you just a tiny little snippet because I think it really sums up well what this book does. So this is a book of first steps. Their meaning will change as your experience changes. This book contains the bones of many arguments and observations, a vertebrae here, a mandible there, but the whole skeleton is what you make of it. You'll find as much about thought and perception here as you will about language. There are no rules, only experiments. The premise of this book is that most of the received wisdom about how writing works is not only wrong, but harmful. This is not an assumption, it's a conclusion. And so his argument is that most people who write about writing know what works for them, and they do it usually in a looking back analytical kind of way, but it can't really explain the magic of things, and it can't really explain the small little details. And so the whole book is little chunks of wisdom that you can test and experiment with and see if they work for you, and then apply or not apply as you may choose. And so it's just a really interesting way to look at the writing craft, and also to look at a how-to book where it is sort of a jumping off point for a lot of thinking. So it's really interesting so far. I'm just kind of digging into it, and I thought you might all be interested in that as well. Okay, so Now we are going to dive into the interview with Eileen, and then we'll be back at the end to chat about what we heard and see what you thought about it. We'll see you soon. Hey there, everybody. We are here talking with Ms. Eileen Cook, who is a previous guest on the podcast and someone we are familiar with. But we have her back today talking about being a full-time author because there is a new release that you can get your hot little hands on called Full-Time Author, which is all about making that switch to being a full-timer and doing this as a career. So I think if we could start off, Eileen, with a bit of a story about how you came to be a full-time author and when you made that leap.
I think it all depends with so many things about like when do you want to start the clock ticking. In terms of being a full-time author has been my goal, my dream since I was a little kid. So I was that person going to the library at a very young age and already imagining my book on the shelves and all of those kinds of things. But for a long time, that's what it was. It was just kind of a dream or a daydream that I was having. And I think what I found, which is what I think a lot of people find, is there is very rarely like a step into being a full-time author. It's like a slow ambling shuffle in that direction. So a little of one step forward and one step back is I knew that I loved writing. So I was fortunate enough to get my first book out and published in 2008. And of course, my dream was like, I'll just quit my job and I will now do this full time. But alas, they didn't pay me that much, certainly not enough to walk away from my job at that point. So I started looking at how to move towards that. And certainly what I tell a lot of people when I'm asked and they say, can you make a living as a writer, is it takes a body of work. So of course, what you want to do is write a book, have that book sell really well, and then hopefully have people be like, my God, she's brilliant. I have to go buy her other books. And then they go back and buy your backlist. And then you bring out a new book and they like that book, plus the last book you did, plus your previous backlist. And so I started to build a certain amount of income that was coming in from both current books and past books. But then it was also about kind of spreading out. So I started doing a little bit more writing and coaching with other people. I started to get hired to do teaching, and I, continued to teach with the Creative Academy and with Simon Fraser University. And so slowly, each of these things kind of came into being, each bringing kind of a little portion of income. There was money coming from foreign sales, from things like audiobooks. All of those things sort of came together where it wasn't a leap to becoming a full-time author. At that point, it was a step. And here I am. A frequent flyer on your podcast.
There you
All
go.
I ever wanted.
I think there is an interesting conversation to be had around why we called the book Full-Time Author and not Full-Time Writer.
Oh, and you're going to have me make that conversation. Just because it's her podcast now, she's like, I just asked the question. I think there was a bunch of different reasons for that. And part of that was for people to kind of understand that definition of author really encompasses a lot of those different things. So we wanted to make the distinction between just writing for full time, which could be, for example, writing copy. It could be, writing technical guides and things like that. We wanted to make the distinction that the focus was being on an author. And then from that, there are obviously other things that sort of expand that out, but those are all based around the idea of you as a creative person, whether in the fiction or nonfiction field, but building your life and your career around that concept.
Yeah, I think that is really important as people have this vision of just a writer, someone tucked away in their garret, plunking away on their computer or their typewriter or their notepad, depending on the era. And that's what you do. You just write books, but it's not just that, because that is one part, hopefully a major part of what you're doing. But even when you get a traditional publishing contract, there's still an expectation that you will be a bit of a public figure, at least that you will help with some promotion, maybe have some social media accounts, like all of these things have to fit
And
into
the
your day.
business, like, I mean,
Yeah.
I have to say, I was a full-time proponent of the Garrett idea, particularly if I could have that, say, in France. That would have been, the fact that I don't speak French was not a limiting factor in my fantasy. I learned to speak French, probably from a very cute Frenchman. But it was this idea that, yeah, I would be toiling away. I would, type, I would write the end, I would send it off, and magic elves, known as my agent and publisher, would craft it into a book and put it out in bookstores, and then the money would just kind of show up in tiny little bricks on the front door. And that so far has not come to pass. And I've realized that there is this whole business side of things, whether that's, control of my assets, my working relationships with people within publishing, keeping track of funds, keeping track of what rights have been sold, what rights haven't sold, promotion, reader engagement. The idea that, if I'm writing full time, I'm, getting up not early, because again, this is our fantasy. So I'm, lounging out of bed in my feather bathrobe at, 8 a.m. with a cup of tea, and I write for, 6 hours before I go off and practice my French with my lover. That really isn't the case. There's a lot of other things. On so many reasons that is not the case, but in particular is because it is a job. And I think that is one of the biggest shifts that I made in my mind. It's a job that I love. There is no other job I would rather be doing than this job. But it is a job, which means I write on days when I don't necessarily feel creative. There are tasks of the job that I don't particularly care for and like doing. And some of those I can sometimes farm out. I'm a big fan of, bringing in help whenever possible, but there are some things at the end of the day you have to do because it is your business at this point. And I think particularly, I don't know if you want to comment on the shift, is I think people embrace that on indie publishing side. That's part of what attracts them, is this idea of control of the process. And I think traditional people were all like, oh, I'm going to have people for that. So I think people on the traditional side, we sometimes are surprised. And there's sometimes this moment of discouragement of like, oh, there's all these other things and I am going to be expected to be a part of that.
Yeah, I think that is true, that for a lot of people, your personality and your sort of predisposition to enjoy certain things that are part of that business side, or the publishing actual act of doing the things, it is very different. So knowing your own personality and what your skill sets are is really, really important when you are deciding what might be a better fit for you, and what kind of budgets you have available. And yes, there are spreadsheets involved in being a full-time author. You can resist all you want, but if you really want to do that, yes. But if you really want to do this, then that is something, the more you're willing to embrace the parts you don't love, the better as a career overall you're going to be able to develop things and be moving forward. And I think you made an interesting point that going full-time as an author, it's not usually precipitated by like a single choice or an action. I mean, you hear stories about people who are like, well, I lost my job and I couldn't find another one and I was desperate and I'd always wanted to be an author. So I just did. And so, yeah, there's probably a rough couple of years in there with the establishing things, but we don't usually recommend, if you want to be a full-time author, that you go out and quit everything to leap off the deep end blind, but that you do kind of layer in these other pieces and you work your way towards that. But how do you know when it's time to actually make that shift, whether it's in your mind or the language you're using or the way that you schedule your day? What do you think are some things people should watch for that might indicate they're ready for that?
Ooh, good question. I think there's probably, she's like, I know, that's why I'm in charge of the podcast. I think there are a lot of things that kind of help with that. I think part of it is thinking through and first just having a clear idea in your head that you have let go of the strictly romantic version of the idea. And you've let go of the Garrett, you've let go of the Frenchman, you've let go of all of that in favor of kind of understanding what that would look like. And part of that means, again, depending on your personality type, but I'm going to lean on myself for a minute. And all of a sudden the sun came out. I'm like, oh, is fear around finances. So, when you have a day job, every 2 weeks, assuming that you show up, they pay you. Writing doesn't work that way. It tends to be in clumps. There may be delays. In traditional publishing, it's not too bad. You're usually paid monthly, kind of after a 2-month delay. In traditional publishing, it's a much bigger delay. You're typically only paid twice a year out for your royalties, and then again upon signing contracts. So part of it is really understanding your finances and understanding what you feel comfortable with, and whether or not that's that you have a nest egg or a spouse or some other way that you have sort of budgeted it out to feel comfortable with that leap, I think is a big part of what kind of gets you ready for that, and that you have done the work. I mean, I almost think of it in the same way as if you were buying a franchise to open your own knitting store. My dream come true. My tea, knitting store combo. You'd have to research, where's the space that I want to have that store? Do I have the funds to get that store up and running? Do I have the business documents I need? Do I have all these things organized? Do I know who I'm going to reach and how I'm going to reach them? And those are the same things that you're doing as a writer. Like, have you researched the market? Do you know where your books are going to land? Do you know how you're going to build up your readership? How you're going to reach out to all those people? Because you are, in essence, opening a business. I mean, there may not be any storefront. That's just your website. But there is, in fact, a business that's being operated. So you want to do as much of that homework beforehand. So what am I missing? Because I know you'll have thoughts on this.
I think the side of preparation that's not about the practical stuff, but that's about the emotional stuff, I think is really interesting, because for a lot of people, you may not anticipate what it's going to be like to work by yourself at home for the most part. How are you going to deal with building a community, or making sure you don't actually become a hermit in your garret, but still have some kind of contact with the outside world?
That's
because
so catchy. Behalf of hermits,
fair. No disrespect to actual hermits intended, as long as that's your intention. But I think there's a little bit of a risk to inadvertently become cut off when so much of our social systems and so much of our networks can be built around our occupation or our job setting. And, I think the whole world is transitioning a bit on that front right now, and everybody's learning how to work from home and how all these things work. Now, writers have been working from home before it was cool. So I think
social distancing before it was cool. Writers.
we have this down for sure, but I think that there are some risks in both the social isolation piece and also in the physical health side. I mean, I know when I was in hustle mode, trying to build up enough of a catalog and other things and enough teaching gigs to make my writerly career pay all the bills it needed to, I was a server and I worked in like nightclubs and restaurants, and I would get 20,000 steps a shift without even thinking about it. All you do is walk for 8 to 10 hours a day. And then when I wasn't doing that anymore and my job was to sit and write things, that has consequences. So you need to start working into your schedule and working into your habits and completely change everything about how your day looks like.
Well, work provides structure, right? Like particularly, like there's a certain time you have to be at work, and there's certain people that, you're working with and relying on. And when you become, working at home by yourself, it's really easy. Like I can remember for me early on in my kind of full-time career is I had this realization, like, I don't think I've talked to anybody real in weeks. And I'd had my head down. It was close to a deadline. I was, subsisting off takeout and Diet Coke, and that is not a good place to be. And so for me, part of what learning to be a successful full-time author has been about creating structure. So looking at things that I do on a regular weekly basis, whether that's, things to get me up and moving, but also lunches with friends. And again, during pandemic times, even if those were online, but just making sure, and nothing against my dogs because they are fabulous conversationalists, but it's kind of good to have that check-in and also that support, because being a full-time author, again, there is nothing else I would rather do, but there certainly is some significant up and down at times. And so I think it is useful to make sure you have that support system, because I think unlike, well, maybe I'm being judgy, but unlike in other careers, I think writers, we tend to really blur that line between who I am and what I do even more than other people may do. It becomes, a statement. If someone doesn't like your book, it's about feeling like you yourself have been rejected. And I didn't have that when I was writing medical legal reports. Like, I didn't like it if someone didn't like my work, but it didn't feel personal. Whereas writing is a very different sense.
And I'm curious, so when writing does go from a hobby or a side hustle or something that we just love to do on the weekend and evenings, and so we do it, when it shifts into the day job and you literally need to create stuff or you don't buy groceries, how did that feel, or was that challenging, or did that change your relationship with stories and writing?
I think it did. I think you do hear it from a lot of people, and I've heard it from a lot of agents and editors, the second book struggle. And a lot of that has to do, for a lot of people, the first book, they may have written it over years. It was their baby. They wrote it on the evenings. They wrote it when the muse called to them. And then the second book comes with this deadline, which is like, nobody cares if your muse showed up or didn't show up. You better show up and be in front of that typewriter and turning those pages out. So for me, that was the shift where I started to think of it as, okay, this is my job. And that means that I need to show up, even if I'm not feeling creative, even if the muse isn't there, that I need to treat it that way. And I think that is a shift. And I think you have to work a little bit harder sometimes as a full-time author to remember the joy. Like, that's one of the reasons that I love teaching and mentorship and stuff at the Creative Academy, because you see people who are so excited about their story and, they want so badly to get it out. And it reminds me, like, oh yeah, that's what this is. How fortunate am I that I've had the chance to do that? So it kind of reawakens that excitement for me. And I think it's important to fill your brain so that new ideas are coming to you all the time. So that's podcasts and classes and going to the art museum or watching a movie or, reading, any of those things, to just kind of remember that, strangely enough, filling the well is a part of your job. Creativity comes naturally. I do believe that. I think every person can be creative. But I think when you have to expend creativity every day, you need to make sure that you are putting some ideas back in your idea box. And I see you actually even have an idea box on your shelf. And I'm like, that's darn handy.
Literal idea box, yes.
You need to put some ideas in there so you can later pull them back out.
Well, and in fact, that idea box is full of toys. It is like this wooden toy that, like, you just, if you need something to clear your brain, you can turn it and it clickety clacks all the way down. And there's one that's a kaleidoscope that's made of wood, and you can look at anything in your world with it, and it turns that into a kaleidoscope image, which was a present from my mom about 1 million years ago. But I keep it there because I need to look at things in a different way, and that's part of being a writer. So there's a handful of just like fun things like that are actually just kind of playful and silly and interesting and make you look at the world in a different way. That is one of the benefits of being a full-time author, is that being creative is an acceptable part of your job description. So I have Dr. Zeus wisdom on my shelf and random silly things in the background that you can see, because it helps keep a bit of the joy and the fun in those things.
And if you're a writer, people will buy you endless amounts of blank notebooks. That is the other benefit of being a writer. If you ever thought, I wonder if I'll ever have a blank notebook, just become a writer.
Well, not to mention said blank notebooks that one purchases for themselves become
Oh
business
yeah,
expenses. So there's
you're
a
here.
whole side benefit to having this as a career for sure. I think one of the other things that's really interesting is you said, as a self-employed person, as a full-time author, you are going to set your schedule. You are going to decide what your life looks like. You are going to be the only one managing you. You are your own boss. And so maybe sharing anything that you either have found challenging or that is challenging for people when they are making that switch from a day job scenario with lots of structure to, oh, I don't actually have to get out of bed or get out of my pajamas ever if I don't want. How does that work?
The one thing that I have discovered is that because I do have the flexibility, that I can change it up. And I do find I go through different modes. So, for example, in the summer times, I tend to wake up really early, partly because I don't have great, as you can tell, curtains to block the light. So my place tends to brighten up quite early in the morning. So I will get up early and kind of get the day going. As winter comes, I tend to sleep a little bit later. And I tend to be a little more creative in the evening. I don't know if it's the fire's on in the fireplace, but suddenly I feel that. Whereas again, in the summer, by evening, I want to be on a patio. Like it's a totally different experience. So one part I think is respecting my own challenges. And, one of the things that I really like is to sort of sit down every so often and look at my schedule and figure out if it's working. So what will help me? And I may end up changing it up. But there are some things I've sort of consistently found useful, which is I do best when I have a couple of days where I don't have a bunch of things scheduled that are big open blocks that can be used for writing, can be used for something, can get filled in if they need to. So that means that I'm often trying to squish appointments and other things into a couple of days, maybe earlier in the week, so that I have those done. So other things that have worked is turning off things like social media, my phone, various things, like if I need to have a concentrated block where I'm actually kind of freeing my brain to do that. One thing I never thought would work, but I find oddly really does, is those writing sprints that we do in the Creative Academy. I thought, oh, I always get my words in. I don't need to sit down with a bunch of other people in a totally silent room and write. But that sort of accountability and that sort of specified time means that I often can kind of, sandwich some words in, which always feels good. I try and kind of respect my own body and those kinds of things. So making sure I'm putting in some times to move. Otherwise, I can get nappy in the afternoon. So I find like if I block, even just to take my dogs, and I can't use the W word because they're around, if I take them for an ambulation, say around lunchtime, it recharges me and them. So that's kind of a benefit. So I think there are those things of knowing, like, is there a particular time that you feel more creative? And for some people, it's mornings or afternoons. Then making sure that that time is sacred for your most important, most prioritized work. And then kind of shifting around that. And then, at least for me, the biggest hurdle was understanding that changed. Because I had set up a schedule where I was like, Mondays I do this, Tuesdays I love nothing like a list. Wednesdays I do this, all these kinds of things. And that worked great until it didn't. So sort of understanding that shifts kind of depending on what I'm working on, what's happening in my personal life, has made a huge amount of difference, but it means checking in.
Yeah, I think that is the ability to shift seasonally or around, like if you have a teaching gig that runs for 3 months and then you don't, then you are constantly going to be shifting your schedule a little bit. So focusing more on like the routines that lead into your writing time, as opposed to I can only write between these hours or in this set of perfect circumstances, because that is, as we know, very difficult to achieve those perfect circumstances on any kind of regular basis. So being able to shift and change a little bit, but having some things stay consistent is really important. Speaking of consistency and things shifting and changing, we had talked about income being something that is all over the map and sort of like a roller coaster a lot of times. And it is completely impossible to predict. Even if you are indie published and you're getting a consistent income every month from your royalties and you've built up a platform and you've nailed your ad systems, something changes on one of those ad platforms and suddenly you have 50% less income that month than you were expecting. Or something happens in the world and people just aren't reading books as much for a few weeks, or whatever that is. Maybe your publisher goes under. You just don't know what's going to happen. And so one of the things I think is a really good practice, if you think you're ready to go full-time as an author, you want to make sure you can make and stick to a budget. And that sounds very basic, but actually for a lot of people, if you're used to there just always being more money every couple of weeks in that account, you might need to do a little bit of an audit of your finances and look at, okay, is there a bunch of stuff I'm subscribed to that would be A, distracting me from writing, and B, adding to the money I need to make every month? Like, you can do a lot with subtracting from the things that you're responsible for, in terms of not needing to make as much. And that might mean you could go full-time a little sooner if that is your passion and you are not loving your day job. Then looking at ways you can reduce the expenditures on your day-to-day kind of stuff around your own life, and what you can minimalize or subtract is a way to kind of escalate the timeline a little bit sooner to be able to get into that kind of stuff.
I mean, even speaking for myself, like I went from, the traditional house in the burbs with the lawn and all of that to living in a condo. And there was a host of reasons for that. But one of the reasons that actually gave me some amount of real happy is it cut my expenses significantly. So I think if you're going as a full-time author, kind of knowing where you spend your money, so tracking that for a period of time, looking at where those things are, looking at what things you could cut if you wanted to, or where if you had to. Like, there are several things I know, like, okay, if I needed to, I could jettison this expense. So I choose to have it now because don't get between me and my Netflix. But if something came up, I could live without Netflix. I could cancel that. I could move on. So kind of knowing where there's some give and whether or not you want to subtract certain things so you have more freedom and flexibility.
Excellent. I think one other interesting area as well is around negotiating with the other people in your world. If you are going to make that jump to full-time author and you're coming from a situation where you were in a day job, for some people, they're like, ooh, you're home all the time now. So that's great. So you can deal with, the deliveries and you can handle the dishes and every kind of interruption suddenly becomes your job but you're home. And so I think maybe any tips for setting some boundaries in both space and scope creep of your jobs would be super helpful.
I think this is really, really important for people who have a spouse or kids at home, where it becomes that idea of, yeah, you're the one who's at home, so you can do those things. And I think as much as possible that you can be setting some timelines, like if you can go to a separate place in your home, like if you can have an office with a door, where you can shut the door and where it is clear that when this door is shut, I am at work. I think a lot of people are probably getting some amount of this right now with the pandemic, because you're finding that you are home. So it is that thing of, yeah, there is the glory of I can, throw a load of wash in while I'm working on something and, have clean laundry at the end of the day and my page is done. But if I'm also sticking in that I'm going to go to the grocery and I'm going to pick up the dry cleaning and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, then those pages don't get done. So I think you do have to block off, even if it is just an hour at a time, certain things where it's like, in these times, I cannot be bothered. And then other times, maybe I can do some of those extra things. And again, a lot of people may make a deal with a spouse where one spouse will become the quote unquote day job runner. And in return, the writing spouse will take on more of the things at home. But then you just need to figure out, how am I going to schedule these things so that they don't ooze out? Because sometimes you can feel very productive because it's like, well, the kitchen is clean. And it's great. And you might get feedback from people where they're like, wow, that kitchen looks amazing. And you made, beef bourguignon and all this other stuff. But was that what you needed to be doing with your day? Was that your priority? Or could the kitchen be clean enough and something else have happened? So I think it's about creep. I think when you use that word, that was a really good way of sort of, your role can shift without thinking about it. So regular check-ins, as we talked about, with schedule, with your health, with your job creep, checking in how your relationships are going with the people around you. You need to do it maybe much more often than, at work, we often had kind of a yearly check-in where you meet with your supervisor. We kind of advocate 12-week years, right? And that for me has ended up being really useful because I usually know what's coming up in 12 weeks. Is just sitting down and being like, did I accomplish what I wanted to in the last 12 weeks? Are my priorities the same? Have they shifted? Are there going to be new demands? Are the kids home, not home? Is it spring? Is it winter? Are people coming to visit? All of those things that let me kind of decide and be the master of my schedule instead of the other way around.
Yes, absolutely. I think maybe one last topic that would be interesting to touch on is just around our approach to our creative projects. We can kind of get protective of them and a little precious sometimes. And it does boil down to it being a business, and that can be a hard thing to reconcile. But I think if people know themselves which things that really matter to them, whether it's sort of how you want your characters depicted on your cover, or, if you know what you're comfortable with having things adjusted in your book or in your publishing process to make more sense from a marketing perspective, and what are you not? Because, you are going to find yourself in situations where you have to make a decision, and you're going to have the fact that you need to pay your bills warring against this creative side of yourself. So what advice, if any, would you have for people who are trying to find that middle ground or manage those pieces?
I think there are a few different things that you can do. One exercise that I have done with clients when I used to be a counselor, and one of the things I do sometimes with my characters is a kind of a values card sort, and you can actually just download them from online, and you sort of sort what values are the most important to very important, somewhat important, and not important at all. And of course, then the trick is you have this nice big stack under very important, and someone says, well, you can only pick 3. So that becomes a moment where you're doing this thing of like, and you have to really narrow it down. And I think it's useful to know, what is it that is really, really important to me, so that you can kind of figure out where you want to make those stands. Because it's also sometimes a way of protecting yourself, or well, this can't go out until it's perfect. And that means it doesn't have to go out, and that means no one has to judge it, and nothing's going to happen with it. So kind of knowing yourself, why am I making this ball in the sand? Is it about feeling in control? And I feel out of control if other people are helping. Is it around wanting to procrastinate? Or is this something where it's no, this is vitally important to me, and I need to make a stand. And if that means something gets delayed, then it's important enough to do that.
So writer, know thyself, know where you stand, know what your things are important to you that will keep you being you. I think it's very hard once money starts being exchanged for creativity. It can be an interesting negotiation process with yourself, and will you want to work on that project? There's contract work. There's all kinds of different ways to make money from your writing. And so there's lots of interesting choices to be made along the way that will make it be your journey instead of someone else's. Now, we picked this topic because there is a book that we wrote called Full-Time Author. And where should people get their hands on this fine piece of work?
Well, I'm so glad that you asked. They certainly can go to Amazon. They can go to their local book dealer in terms of any online forum that will be made available to them. And they can always check us out on the Creative Academy website. So we have a nice kind of link of all of our books up on there, and you can see a little bit more about what they are about and see if this one or others might be useful to you.
As always, we will put all the links in the show notes for you so that you can easily find a copy. And the book, we are experimenting with wide, folks. So the book is available in all of the places online that you could possibly want to buy books. So we encourage you to support whoever you feel good about supporting. And we look forward to hearing what you think.
Well, yeah, I think we'd love to know what you think. And if for people are on their full-time journey, I hope they send us emails and let us know how it's going. And we're big believers. There's always room on the shelf. So we want more of you out there, more people to invite to the parties.
We are back, and it's always great to interview Eileen. She has several different ways to add value. And today, she did so by relating her experience as a full-time author. It's been several years now that she has been this smooth sail kind of phase, even though there is nothing of smooth in the writing world. But there are definitely some things that she said that made me think a lot about this side of the business. One of the very first things that actually she hinted at, Crystal, when she said, you have to have a body of work, a backlist in order to make this really work long term. And the reason that I'm mentioning this over everything else as the first point that I want to discuss with you is that you will have to realize that your career is made by a different set of steps, and your books provide you with those steps. So if you have one or two, you're not going to go necessarily very far. I mean, it can be a bestseller. You can have like 7 books, and you can be J.K. Rowling, write 7 of them, and you're good to go. But in all the other cases, you have to be a bit like more Authorpreneur, as we like to know, and think in the long term, and realize that every single book brings you closer to your audience, in the sense that people that discover you today, let's say you, Crystal, and let's say they just downloaded Silverbell, okay? But let's say that this was several years ago and you had just Silverbell. That was it. You were done. Now, 2020, almost finished these lovely years. If they purchase, if they download Silverbell, what's going to happen is that they see a plethora, a number of different works. And if you love that, if they love that, they're going to really buy a lot of stuff, because your backlist is big. It's solid. You have different works. And I think that's what Eileen was hinting at. She doesn't have 1 or 2 books. She has several books, actually in different genres. More than that, she's publishing traditionally and self-publishing some of the stuff, like books, non-fiction books from the Creative Academy. What this tells me, and I don't know if it tells you something different, is that first, being in this game in the long run, it's not a guarantee to make you or break you, but it's definitely better than try for 1 or 2 years and just releasing a couple of titles and then just abandon it. So thinking long term, diversify your stream of incomes. Again, she's doing self-publishing, and also she's doing traditional publishing, but she also loves teaching. So that can be another stream of revenues. And people that love your newest book have to check also your previous one. That's why I was hinting at backlist and stuff. People might go through you with, for example, the old McAllister series box set, right? In that sense, they might see, oh, this author, there is like another book. Oh, now, what's this about? And maybe they love that. And so that's what I'm trying to hint at. You don't have a book or 2, you have several. So I want to ask you, since you spoke with her directly, do you think that when she said backlist, do you necessarily need to have a series of books, or standalone books also are important for your writing career?
I think it's always easier to get readers to commit to multiple books in a series because they're usually attached to the characters of the world or something else already. But I mean, Eileen doesn't write in a series other than the nonfiction. The fiction books, for the most part, are not in a series. And so I think you definitely can build a backlist. But I know for me, when I find a new author that I really like, I want to go and read everything they've written. And I'm not saying, oh, I won't read it because it's not a series, but some people just really like those. And so it can be a little easier to get that consistency if you do have folks reading the same thing. So, yeah, it's not an either or. I think you can absolutely be successful with either, but you just might find it a little bit easier to get some immediate traction, and you might have a little more read through in a series where people do get really attached. But there's also the opposite problem, which is series fatigue. So people often, if writers kind of carry a series too far and there's not enough change, or they start to get really repetitive, or everything's a little bit too much the same, or they run out of ways for their character to change and grow because they've kind of gotten so many books in the series that they don't really have anywhere else to go, then you can get readers kind of opting out because it's kind of got old or stale or doesn't feel so exciting. And as a writer, if you've written 15 books in a series, are you still excited about those characters and that world? That's a key question to ask. So I think you can go all the way in either direction, but really somewhere in the middle is nice, that you might do some standalones as those appeal to you, and then you may have some kind of cornerstone series that keep things going as well. It is, as you said, that's another form of diversification, of having multiple options. I think one of the biggest things is really looking at how well do all the pieces support each other. So it takes a lot of energy to switch gears, switch brains, and to alternate between like the teaching and the writing, and jumping between nonfiction writing in areas that you teach in. That's a pretty easy pairing, right? That doesn't require a shift in the type of thinking you're doing. Whereas if you are going from fiction to nonfiction and bouncing around, that is a little bit harder. So I think just being aware that while diversification is good and interesting, whether it's in genre or income stream or wherever, with each shift you make, you are increasing the amount of energy and attention that has to be paid, and you're going to have to learn more things to do it well and put in more energy to keep things going and maintain your momentum in each of those areas. So we've talked about before the kicking the soccer ball down the field metaphor, where if you have 5 balls that you're trying to kick down the field and you only get 5 kicks in a day, each one can't get all that far. But if you have just 1 ball or 2 balls, you can make a lot more progress down the field with those same number of kicks. So keep that in mind as you're looking at diversification. There's a point at which if you go past it, you get diminishing returns actually for having all of that. So a little bit of diversification and a dose of focus in combination is ideal.
Yeah, I also think the other thing that she mentioned, when you are talking and thinking of yourself as a full-time author and you deserve that, let's say, deserve the title, it's just not something that happens overnight. It's just a build-up of things that brings you to that moment. And she relates when she had the first book published, but it was a number of steps. It wasn't an overnight success. So I think it's important for us to consider also the full-time business thing. It requires time, and we mentioned the word marathon instead of sprint several times. What I also think it's important that she mentioned while she was talking about the business side of things is that it's actually a business. Gone are the days when she thought of this as a muse-inspired process that you write whenever you want. You have your glass of wine. I think she mentioned something about the French lover and stuff like that. Just to take the idealized version of it out of the picture, you're in business. And we like that concept because we're talking about strategic authorpreneur. So there is the authorpreneur's part of it with author. And that's because it's not about full-time writer. It's about full-time author, which requires a number of different hats that you have to be able to wear. You can be a full-time copywriter. You can be, and you can definitely do that. But if you want to define yourself as an author, there are a number of things that you have to be proficient at. So she definitely said one of the things she maybe didn't enjoy the most was, like, for example, learning Amazon ads or Facebook ads, stuff like that. She understands that it's important. But for example, I'm sure you, Krista, you have more on that side. You know a lot of that stuff because where you come from, it's the indie publishing world. And she, as she mentioned, she comes from the traditional published work, but she sees how good things can be taken from one side and the other side. And all, again, to come back to the point that this is a business, so you should be able to wear different kind of hats. When she talked about you have to be good at budgeting, there was an whole conversation that you had because you don't get paid the same way as a day job, right? She was like, you show up. If you show up every couple of weeks, you get the paycheck, and you can buy food with that, put clothes on your back, shelter, that kind of things we need to survive. But in the publishing world, royalties come in a very different ways, and things can change. And in a day schedule, and in a day, actually, in a couple of days, even Amazon ads, maybe the whole platform change, and suddenly 50 or 70% of royalty goes down, or maybe it's different. Like something goes well, and for some reason the Amazon algorithm kisses you and your books, and they skyrocket, and you make thousands of dollars per month. What do you do with that money? You have to be good at budgeting them because they're going to be rainy days. And so I was very happy that you guys talked about that on this same subject. Since you are an expert on that, Krista, on the businessy side of things, what do you think would be interesting for listeners and watchers and viewers when you have to treat something like writing as a business? And let's say they don't see how this is possible. Let's say, well, I didn't start all of this because I wanted to, being able to fill up an Excel spreadsheet and put numbers in it. That's not where I started writing. What do you say to these people?
Well, I think there's a few different ways you can come at that conversation. One is, if you want to make it a business and you want to make a living from it, you don't really have a choice. You do need to treat it as a business. The part you have a choice about is how you run that business. There are some business owners who they hire a bookkeeper, they hire an accountant, and they hire people to do their marketing and promotion for them. And that's fine. If you have the funds for that, if you have the cash and you can say, I don't want to do those parts, I'm going to pay other people, then you can absolutely do that. I did not come from a background where I had enough ready money just to hire people to do all the pieces from the beginning. I had to learn how to do everything myself, or it wasn't going to happen because there just wasn't a budget for that kind of thing. And so I think it really is, it's part of it's a choice in terms of how you want to approach your business. I find some of this stuff interesting. And so I like to know enough about all the pieces that even if I do choose to hire it out, I know enough about it to hire the right person and to understand if they're doing a good job, and to make sure that I know what questions to ask them, to know, are they doing it right, or are they staying on track with things, and do I need to worry about stuff? So I really do think that knowledge is power. You can deny it as much as you want, but it's going to prevent you from being as successful as you could be if you understood how the business worked. So we absolutely can choose how much of our time each day and week and month and year we spend on the business things. And that, I think, is where your power and your creative freedom comes into play. Is you can do a bit of analysis on your own personality, and you can look at what are the parts of it that you really enjoy, what do you maybe not enjoy but you're willing to just learn enough about so that you can be effective in your management of those pieces. And so I think, yeah, if you're in denial about it and you absolutely cannot accept the fact that your writing is a business, that's okay. But maybe it's better for you to be coming at it as a hobby that you love, or just something that you do for fun, and maybe you get the occasional royalty check, and that's okay. But if you are planning to be a full-time author and base your entire career off of it, you're going to have a really hard time being successful and managing your career over time if you're just being blind to all of the business aspects of things. I think if you choose not to see them, you're definitely limiting your potential and how far you can go. Okay, on that note, we are going to dive into the curious jar while you all think about how you want to approach the businessy stuff. All right. The lid is off. I'm going to dig my hand around until Michele tells me to stop. More?
Now you can stop.
Okay. Orange one today. Our curious jar question this day. Okay. Are there words you like so much you just want to jam them into your stories? Are there any words you try to avoid?
You know, this makes me, I don't know why, the moment you started reading the question, I was like, I know what this is about. I don't know why. It just maybe a fifth sense. I was remembering like somebody asked exactly the same question in an interview with Neil Gaiman, and he came out with, yeah, I don't like the word moist. And I was like, but why? And I was like, I like every single words if they help me, give a better, a better experience to the reader and a better description of what's happening. But I kind of get what he says with moist. Like for me, I have nothing against that word, but it's on a author base and word base. So I guess to answer that question, there probably are there is actually a couple of words that I've read recently in a book that I was like, I need to jam one of these in one of my story ASAP because this word is great. And it was like the word suggestion, but used in a very different way. The book was Red Sister by Mark Lawrence, and he was using it as to describe an ambient and to describe a place. So he would say something like, and I really hope I'm not misunderstanding the thing, but he would say, maybe there is this iron sky with the suggestion of blue, something like that. And I was like, this is a really great way to use the word like word suggestion in description. So I was like, I need to use suggestion in some way, but I didn't actually accomplish that yet. So that's definitely suggestion used for describing something or someone would be nice. That would be the word that I now have stuck in my mind. I can't think of anything else. I can just think of the Neil Gaiman interview, his answer, moist, and then suggestion from Mark Lawrence. And I pass the word to you, Krista. Let's see if you can come up with better stories than me.
Oh, well, I really like interesting words. So on my computer, my screensaver is the one that comes up with strange and unusual words and their definitions. And so I have them kind of running on my screen all the time. And every now and then something will pop up and I'll be like, oh, that I totally need to figure out how to work that into either a class or conversation or a story. Zero examples of exactly what they are come to mind, but there's a lot, like words that feel like what they mean. I really love, like luminescence is, phosphorescence, like they glow and they feel very bright and shiny and magical. And I like words like that. I also really like made up words. Those make me happy. Where an author has been able to be so convincing in their world building and they've made up a word and it becomes a real thing. So Dennis Foon, I believe, made up a word that he wanted to replace the swear words in his books because he writes for like teenagers and he didn't want to get banned, I guess. And so he made up this word and it was a stand-in for swear words. And he did it so convincingly that there was a couple of school districts that actually banned his books because of the swearing, but he didn't even use any swear words. And so he said that was a major creative victory for him because he was able to be so convincing in his invented language that this fake word became enough of a convincing swear word to get him banned. So I thought that was very cool. I am with the no moist. Moist is not a good word, and I write romance, so that's just not a thing. There is a whole abundance of terms that I never want to see in books in a romance context, and I am not going to list them all here, but I am sure that anyone who has ever read, especially older romance novels, you have all of these total euphemisms for sex and different things, and it's just horrendous to read. So I'm going to go ahead and spare you all the earworms of those and trust that you can make your own list of the words you do not want to hear in books. If you do have any particularly good words or horrible words that you feel you need to pass along for us for torturous purposes, then absolutely you can email us at ideas@strategicauthorpreneur.com. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you can drop in the comments or leave us a comment wherever you're listening to this and let us know your favorite and least favorite words that you would like to work into things.
Also, if any of the things that we mentioned in this episode, books, or any of the people that we actually mentioned interested you, for the show notes and the links to all the resources that we mentioned, and also for coupons and discount on the tools we use and love, you can visit us at strategicauthorpreneur.com as always. And make sure you've signed up for our Just One Thing weekly email, where we make sure to send you at least one thing that can be useful for your authorpreneur journey.
We are going to dive next week into talking about what you do with the manuscript that you may have created during NaNoWriMo. So the end of November marks the end of National Novel Writing Month, and that means millions more people will have a completed manuscript, or completed in quotations, because you're usually not quite done by the time you blast out that first draft. So we're going to dig into what you do next and how you can tackle that. And we will look forward to seeing you then. So make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on that next episode.
Bye, guys. We will see you next week.
Bye.
We will see you next week.
Bye.
I said we will see you next week.
Yep. Do you want to try that again? And then you can...
Then I'm going to make you very small and very tiny and very lovely. There you go. You're small and tiny and lovely. No.
And before we dive into our... try that again.
Cheesy. Sounds weird, but it's okay. Today is a weird day, my dear. Today is a weird day.